And I want to start with a Teacher in Space video. It talks about the program and how the competition was created and how things came to be. And the link to the YouTube version of it I put in the chat in case there are any issues.
Communicating the space experience, sending someone into Earth orbit who could tell us what it's like in our own terms, has long been a NASA goal. And in August 1984, the Spaceflight Participant Program was given the green light by President Reagan.
Today I'm directing NASA to begin a search in all of our elementary and secondary schools and to choose as the first citizen passenger in the history of our space program one of America's finest, a teacher.
Last June, the semi-finalists in NASA's Teacher in Space project met the press for the first time in Washington, D.C. The 114 educators, selected from over 11,000 applicants, spent a week in the nation's capital, becoming familiar with the history of space travel, and of course, taking notes in workshops dealing with various aspects of shuttle flight.
Let's get it red hot.
The next major milestone came in early July, when the 10 finalists were announced. These teachers had survived an extensive screening process, but they had to demonstrate even more right stuff during their 2-week stay at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. After a series of tests to ensure that they were medically fit to fly aboard the shuttle, the 10 were given a ride on the KC-135, a hollowed-out padded jet that simulates weightlessness for short periods of time. Finally, on July 19th, Vice President Bush made the historic announcement.
Congratulations.
And we have elementary school teacher from McCall, Idaho, was selected as the backup candidate, and Christa McAuliffe,
Journal of her
Concord, New Hampshire High
experiences
School
in
social
space.
studies teacher, will be the one to actually fly in space early next year.
It's not often that a teacher is at a loss for words. I know my students wouldn't think so. I've made 9 wonderful friends over the last 2 weeks. And when that shuttle goes, they might be one body. But there's going to be 10 souls that I'm taking with me. Thank you.
You can see everything.
Since their selection, their training in Houston. There's been a lot to learn, but they've shown that good teachers make excellent students. During her shuttle flight, in addition to keeping a journal, Mrs. McAuliffe will teach 2 live lessons from space. One called The Ultimate Field Trip, and the other, Where We've Been, Where We're Going, Why, which will be broadcast via satellite to schools around the country. She will also do a number of other experiments that will be filmed for classroom use after the mission is complete. Her goal?
I would like to humanize the space age by giving a perspective from a non-astronaut, because I think the students will look at that and say, this is an ordinary person. This ordinary person is contributing to history, and if they can make that connection, then they're going to get excited about history, they're going to get excited about the future, they're going to get excited about space.
While Christa prepares for her flight, life goes on in Concord, New Hampshire, where she has taught for the past 5 years. Understandably, things at the McAuliffe house have changed. For example, there's now a noticeable pass from the freezer to the microwave. But husband Stephen, an attorney, daughter Caroline, and son Scott have taken on their added responsibilities without reservation.
You know, you're talking about a human being being free of the bounds of gravity, orbiting the Earth. There aren't many human beings that have done that. So I think both of us feel that whatever the price in terms of readjustments or my taking on things that I probably should have been doing before anyway and hadn't done, whatever those prices are, they certainly pale in comparison to the opportunity.
Visit Concord High, and you immediately understand what a special teacher Mrs. McAuliffe is. Former student Andy Clark.
Even though Mrs. McAuliffe was a great economics teacher, I think what I learned most from her was outside the classroom. She taught me that the little person counts and that anyone can make an effect on our society and on the world. She proved that by being the first private citizen in space and being the first teacher in space. And I think she's a tribute to her profession, and we're all very proud of her.
Even amidst the excitement of witnessing her space, she doesn't forget her students.
I mean, And the whole thing is so gorgeous. You just want to bring it all back into the classroom for the kids.
And truly what Christa wanted to do was bring it all back to the classrooms, to the students, to the kids. And while she never got that opportunity to, NASA, through a partnership with the Challenger Center, which we have the Vice President of Education, Denise Kopecki, with us here today, and she'll share a little bit later on, has been able to still share that on. And I'm excited and honored to have the opportunity to share with you about these lost lessons of Christa McAuliffe. And I apologize about the video of that particular, the quality of the sound on that video, but that's as good as it gets, and I've tried to even do some improvements to it. So again, just to sum it up, the Teacher in Space project was started in 1984. It ran through 1990, and it was a NASA program announced by President Ronald Reagan, which was designed to inspire students, honor teachers, and spur the interest in mathematics, science, and space exploration. The selected teacher or teachers would train for 5 months, whereas a member of an astronaut class now actually trains for 2 years. The ultimate goal of the Teacher in Space project was for that educator to eventually, after flying, return to the classroom. And in 1984, when President Reagan announced that the elementary teacher would be the first citizen passenger to fly in space, there were over 11,000 applicants. Actually, there were 11,416, and that was narrowed down to 114 semifinalists. They had 2 from each state and territory, as well as representatives from the Department of Defense and Department of State, overseas schools, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Interestingly, the gender split was 59 men and 55 women that were selected. And as shown in the video, there were 10 finalists that went to Johnson for further testing. And this here is a picture of Vice President at the time, George Bush, announcing to Christa that she would be selected. So quite amazing, a phenomenal bit of history to go in with that. And one of Christa's quotes, "Reach for it, push yourself as far as you can." And by all means, she did, and truly has been and still is an inspiration for so many. So these are some of the pictures where she was in 0G training. So a lot of the different trainings that were done, even though they put a lot into those 5 months, they went over everything that would have been done on the planned mission. In that video, it was announced that there was going to be 2 live videos or 2 live lessons taught from space. We viewed one of those at the very beginning. If you were here prior to coming on, that was where we've been and where we're going. And in a few minutes, we'll take a look at another one of the second video that they had planned on doing, which is called the Ultimate Field Trip. I can only imagine what that would have been like live. But here's a couple of pictures of Christa in training there on the left. It's Christa and her backup, Barbara Morgan. They were playing leapfrog during the zero gravity chamber exercises. And there on the right, Christa and Barbara are injecting a hydroponic solution into a cylinder while in a zero gravity chamber as practice for one of the experiments that were planned in flight. Had events happened differently and the Challenger's crew missions been completed, it would have brought Christa McAuliffe's science lessons to children around the world. However, the lessons prepared the nation and the world's children. They were never performed. Until recently, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, whenever we mention Joe Acaba and Ricky Arnold, who actually completed Christa's lost lessons in space. In addition to live lessons, Christa had to plan to conduct a number of demonstrations during the flight. The filmed activities known as the 6 lost lessons were to be used as a part of several educational packages. In addition, there were those 2 live lessons that were going to be aired on the PBS on the 6th day of the mission. And this particular one, which is called the Ultimate Field Trip, I'll show you now. The other one we saw at the beginning.
Teacher's TV. Go ahead with the lesson, Christa.
Okay. Good morning. This is Christa McAuliffe, live from the Challenger. And I'm going to be taking you through a field trip. I'm going to start out introducing you to two very important members of the crew. The first one is Commander Scobie, who is sitting to my left, and the second one is Michael Smith. Now, Commander Scobie is going to tell you a little bit about flying the orbiter, and Pilot Smith is going to be telling you a little bit about the Spock, which is the computer that is used on board. Okay, after they talk about that, I'm going to be talking about the seats and how people are seated during takeoff. And I'll be pointing to the two seats or the positions on the floor. Then I'm going to be going to the aft flight deck and show how it can be flown from the back, pointing to the payload bay windows, the overhead windows, how you can see out, and the mission-specific panels that are going to be behind me. I'm going to be standing right here because Dick's going to be in this seat, and Mike is going to be kind of balanced to his right with the Spock on his lap. He's going to pull the Spock out, and he's going to be over here. Okay, at that point, Mike's going to move out of the way, and I'm going to be going downstairs. Okay?
Okay, you ready to come down?
All right, now when I go downstairs, that's going to move.
I'm going to switch the cameras.
Okay, and I'm going to pick up the handheld mic down here. Now, the camera that is right over here should pick me up coming down. We're going to talk about the bathroom first? Is that what we decided? Oh, the handheld mic. Okay. Yeah, I wish I had my... Ron's going to be standing right here. Okay? All right. So... Can I just talk in? Okay. Once I get down to the mid deck, I'll be talking about the WCS. Can you see the WCS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can see it.
All right. So the first part, after I push the privacy curtain away, I'm going to be standing over here by the WCS, talking to that camera, explaining how this is configured, talking about the towels and the washcloth. And I'll be talking about the seat. The other person is going to be sitting right in front of the WCS. For takeoff and re-entry, and then I'll talk about the sleep bag. Now, at this point, as I'm talking about the sleep bag, hopefully this camera is going to be ready, okay? And that's why we put the sleep bag in, because we didn't know whether they'd have enough time if all I talked about was the WCS. So we thought I could talk about the sleep restraint and maybe, mention the hatch, but then turn to Ron at the galley, and he would be taking a container out, and I'd be explaining that this is how we rehydrate the food, and he will do the container for me since I have the handheld mic.
He'll do it right.
Okay. Okay, yeah, showing how the drink container works, and then he'll put that back on. Okay? At that point, he's going to... Well, I think we left it open. He's going to open up one of the lockers, and it's just going to be a clothing locker, and it's going to have the restraint here so I can explain to the kids that everything has to be held down, because otherwise we'd have a problem with things floating away. Okay? Then he's going to put that back in the locker, and while he's putting it back, I'm going to be talking about the treadmill that's going to be here. Now, as I'm talking about the treadmill, this is the cue for the crew to start floating into view.
Quite amazing. Now that to me would have been truly an ultimate field trip to have watched in space. But as I said, Ricky Arnold and Joe Acaba did move forward with completing those lost lessons of Christa McAuliffe. In partnership with NASA and STEM on Station, the Challenger Center worked with two educator astronauts, Ricky Arnold and Joe Acaba, and did those lessons on the International Space Station during the 2017-2018 school year. Therefore, teachers in classroom today and all around the world can replicate what Christa wasn't able to do in space. All 6 scripted experiments have been made available, and they include a materials list, setup, and step-by-step instructions for teachers to use within the classroom. I'm going to highlight the chromatography one today, and I'll also share with you about 2 other chromatography ones, leaf chromatography and also walking rainbow. But using these activities, teachers can replicate what was not able to be shared from Orbit by Christa, but Christa's wonderful teaching gift and spirit are captured in the videos, and her remarks and actions in training accomplish most of her lesson plans. These pre-flight lessons were designed for teachers to use in the classroom to prepare their students for the live lessons from Christa, from space that Christa had planned to do. Students who experience the lost lessons will be the future that is touched by Christa's gift. And I know that in talking with some of you, in particular, I think Sally had mentioned that she actually did some of the pre-lessons that were supposed to be done with Christa, or in partnership with Christa. And so, again, just quite amazing. So while we lost these 7 amazing astronauts on that fateful day, January 28th, 1986, we wish to still hone their efforts and their memory of inspiring students. This is a picture of the Challenger STS-51L team, the crew members, and there's more within the PowerPoint that I will share with you about them. But for our focus, I want to go ahead and move in on to talk about today's lessons on chromatography. This was a 4-part series, as I said earlier. It's not that the lessons have to be done in this order. It's just how I happen to choose them, and I called it Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. And so Part 3, which is effervescence, we were supposed to have back the end of April. Due to technical difficulties, we were not able to. So that has been rescheduled for June 1st. And we'll talk more. There'll be an opportunity, even if you want to see a link to that towards the end, if you've not registered for it, that you'd be able to. But today I want to take a look at the chromatography. Now, the target age group is 5 to 8-year-olds. The essential questions are, what is chromatography? What is capillary action and how does it work? And why does one ink separate apart from another? The objectives of this activity are to show how capillary action occurs in microgravity, to show how black ink divides into different colors through a process called chromatography, and to compare and contrast capillary action as seen on board the International Space Station in comparison with a classroom here on Earth. We do look at next-gen standards, in particular the Physical Science 2-2 lesson, and there are also some SEPs that we look at as far as next-gen. Key vocabulary and background, and in a few minutes we're going to see a video about chromatography, and you will hear Ricky go over the majority of these vocabulary words. But specifically, chromatography is the separation of a mixture into its individual components. Mixture is a substance made by mixing other substances together. Capillary action is when a liquid, such as water, moves upward to the cohesive and adhesive properties of the liquid. Cohesion is where particles of the same substance stick together, and adhesion is where particles of different substances stick together. Gravity, well, that's the force of attraction of a body towards the center of the earth or towards any other physical body having mass. I'll also go on to say that the larger the mass, the larger the pull of that gravity. Soluble means able to be dissolved, especially in water. Solvent is able to dissolve another substance. So just some key vocabulary words and backgrounds that would be good for your students to know if that's not known already. The materials for this activity, I think, are relatively simple. A black ink pen, a small strip of paper, a test tube. Now, for that test tube, you'll either need a lid, a cork, or some sort of fastener, and also a paper clip. For teacher preparation, prior to actually doing this within the class, you'll attach the paper to the paper clip, as shown, and bend one end of the paper clip and insert it into the cork, or somehow attach it to the top, whatever you have that's at the top of the test tube. You'll fill the test tube with a small amount of water, making sure that there's enough water to get the paper wet, but not so much that the ink dot would be fully submerged. Submerging the ink dot can potentially provide skewed results, and we want to make sure that that's not what happens. And when you perform this experiment, you want to allow the paper to sit in the water until the ink starts to separate and you can see different colors. Adriana, I do not have any recommendations for source of test tube. Now, I would say the chemistry lab at school, but I mean, I'm not even sure that middle school schools even have a chemistry lab. So, oh, absolutely, Amazon for everything. But in terms of a specific one, no, I don't. As far as substitute containers, I would say as long as it's clear, it would work, you know. So the engage or the opening demonstration in front of the class is an opening demonstration. You want to draw an ink dot on a piece of paper and ask your students the following questions. Do you think the ink in the dot has more colors in it than just the one that you see? How would you be able to see other colors if there were any? And what do you know about the properties of water? So this really gets you to engage with the students, and it really allows what I call a preflection. Let them talk about what they know. And then there's someone there saying that they use a tall glass, clear glass, or a cup. And Sally says to use small cups. So I think as long as you can see and see through it, you're going to be fine in that regard. So when you get to the explore part, that's where we're going to show the video associated with the chromatography lesson, which I'll show on the next slide. Students should observe or take notes during the video. And there are some student handout pages with this activity. And page 7 of the activity has the reflection questions regarding the chromatography. That also gives them an area to do a little bit of reflection regarding astronaut Ricky Arnold's experiment in space. So I think having that particular slide either up and available for the students or a printed off copy of them would also be great. So having said that and having talked about that video, let's take a look at that video.
Houston, we have good video. We're ready for your lesson. Go ahead, Christa.
Okay. Good morning. This is Christa McAuliffe, live from the Challenger.
We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
We've come a long way from the Wright brothers plane to the shuttle. We're planning on doing this.
Hi, my name is Ricky Arnold. I'm a classroom teacher and a NASA astronaut. I've always kind of wondered what was Christa going to do while she was up on orbit. And we're going to actually conduct some of Christa's lost lessons that were never had the opportunity to do because of the Challenger tragedy. Hi there. My name is Ricky Arnold, and I'm living and working on the International Space Station as a part of Expedition 55. Today we're experimenting with chromatography. Chromatography is a technique for the separation of a mixture into its individual components. Let's go ahead and get started. We have a mixture, this black spot, on a piece of chromatography paper. We want to see what different components of light make up black. So we put in the water onto this end of the chromatography paper to see how the ink separates. Water is a universal solvent and should help separate the spots into colors. What do you think's going to happen? Talk about it with your classmates. All right, now let's see what happens. Go ahead and add some water. Here's the first one. Water is going ahead and creeping up the chromatography paper. You can already start to see not much separation here. Very little on this black one, but you can actually see the reds, greens, and yellows starting to separate and make their way up the chromatography paper. The substances, now in liquid form, travel over the solid, the paper, at different speeds, causing them to separate into the component parts. Now that we know what black ink separates into, let's think about how the water was able to move through the paper. I put a drop of water in just one spot, but as you can see, it moved along the paper on its own. How does it do that? Well, it happens through a process called capillary action. Capillary action is when a liquid like water moves upward due to its cohesive and adhesive properties. In other words, water molecules are able to essentially stick together and stick to one another, which is cohesion. And they can also stick to a surface or a container, in this case the paper, in a process called adhesion, and that adhesion pushes it upwards. This happens in microgravity and on Earth. You could try another experiment with chromatography with your parents or your teacher. Grind up some green leaves into a real fine pulp and use some acetone or nail polish remover instead of the water. Leaves are green because they have a chemical called chlorophyll in them, a chemical that can use sunlight to make sugar and oxygen through a process called photosynthesis. However, there are other chemicals in leaves that do the same job, but we just don't see them until fall when the chlorophyll breaks apart. Another way to see fall colors any time of year is to use chromatography. Well, now that we've done this experiment in microgravity, think about how this might look different on Earth. Will the material setup be the same? Will water behave in the same way? Will the same separations happen? Discuss it with a friend, then give it a try. Thanks for participating in our experiment today. I'm Ricky Arnold. We'll see you next time.
So after showing that lesson, or that video, you can actually do an in-class experiment. Now, ideally, you would do this with your students in groups. You can have them do it individually, but I think group work always helps for students to ask more questions. After they do the experiment, ask them what differences or similarities did you observe from your experiment in space versus the experiment that you did within the classroom. What colors did you see on the paper after it was dipped in the water? And why do you think the water climbed up the paper? Always nice to get some, oh, Julie, totally agree. This one here doesn't even require that it be chromatography paper. It just simply says white paper to start with. So, but yeah, there is chromatography paper. But there are handouts for the activity. They've really done a great job of putting these lessons together. So you can see where there's the your turn directions. They have a data and even a data table. And then also a conclusion where they can ask questions. You can elaborate on the chromatography and capillary action. You can provide a diagram of plant structure or a tear duct and reiterate the occurrence of capillary action. I don't know if you've ever put eye drops in your eye. I hate having to keep my eye open. But what I have learned is that I can actually close my eyes, and if I put the eye drop in my tear duct, that it still works its way into my eye, and I don't have to deal with the water splashing in, which I don't know. I don't want to say that I'm a baby about those things, but yeah. So Dolores says she's used secondary color markers to separate into primary colors. Okay, cool. Yeah, and that is important to note that, the process for secondary and primary. Secondary colors always split out, but you got to be careful because the primary colors don't always necessarily have a split color. But you want to talk to the students, provide them a definition about chromatography and capillary action. We've already talked chromatography, but I'll say capillary action is when a liquid like water moves up. Actually, I have shared capillary action already tonight, so apparently I'm going to tell it to you again. But explain how capillary action is essential to life. It goes on in plants. It gets water from their roots to their leaves. How tears flow out of our eyes. And all sorts of different things. We've used different brands of black markers and they all separate differently. Yeah, Doreen, I used to have a Sharpie connection. I had a student whose dad worked at Sharpie and he would send us leftover markers off the floor that weren't I guess, a good enough quality to be sold. And it was always different to see how the different types came out different ways. But always, I did Mother's Day. I would usually have the kids do a Mother's Day bookmark, and I would typically use alcohol to make it spread because the colors spread more like that. But that was a little bit less the capillary issues. But to finalize the activity, sorry, I'm a little off here. To evaluate, final questions and wrap up. Ask the students if they think they would be able to perform the experiment with test tubes in space. Why or why not? And of course, we know we can because we just saw Ricky do it. Although Ricky's was not in test tubes. Do you think that gravity affects how fast the water travels up the paper? Why or why not? How would you set this experiment up differently if you were in microgravity? Would it be more difficult in microgravity? Why or why not? So just getting the students really some inquiry questions there to really think about. There's no such thing as a bad answer, but to really think about how things would be done differently in a different environment, in particular space. There are extensions where there's a couple of different demonstrations, and this information is, again, it's shown within the activity guides. The first is a cohesion adhesion, and that's where you place a piece of paper towel on a flat table, and you put a few drops of water to the piece of wax paper and ask students what they see. And then I add a few more drops of water to the wax paper and ask students what they see. And then add a few drops of water to the paper towel, asking students to explain what has happened. And so that they can kind of see the difference between cohesion and adhesion, and talk a little bit more about the background aspects of that. The other one is talking about gravity, and start out by having the students to define gravity, which is the force that attracts a body toward the earth or another body having mass, and then demonstrate gravity by having a student drop a pencil or jump up and down. Prompt students with a discussion about what keeps pulling them to the ground when they're jumping, and then provide a concrete definition of gravity so that the students have a thorough understanding about it. There are two additional resources. One is on leaf chromatography, and the other is walking rainbow. Leaf chromatography is targeted towards grades 5 through 8, and it shows how chromatography is involved in the coloration of plant life. The walking rainbow, which is again more targeted K through 5, demonstrates how capillary action works. It will deepen the knowledge of primary colors and how they interact with one another. They'll display water's cohesive and adhesive properties. And then you can also watch for evidence or lack of evidence of chromatography with some of the examples that are there. When I did and made the choice to do the 4 lost lessons of Christa McCullough, even though there are 6, I chose to do the 4 because there were videos with the 4 that I highlighted. I'm thinking that I might do an additional one that focuses on the leaf chromatography and the walking rainbow all in one. But that'll be at a later date, and it wasn't an original part of this. Maybe the next time that I do the lost lessons, I'll go deeper into either one of these. But at the end of today's lessons, I still have those separately. Dave, whenever you say that would be neat, are you saying that would be neat if I had a individual lesson for the leaf chromatography, or a webinar for the leaf chromatography and one for the walking rainbow? I want to make sure that I get that, what you're referring to there. Individual lessons. Okay. And I will confess, whenever I first, I had been wanting to do these lessons for over a year, the webinars, for over a year, and just had not had the time. And I decided that I was going to put it on the calendar. I was going to make myself do it, just because there's always something else more important, something else that needs to be done. But if you put a date on it, then you kind of have to have it done, if that makes sense. I know none of you are like that, and none of you are anywhere too busy to just add it, So I didn't really, whenever I set up the series of the 4 lessons, I hadn't really done a deep dive into any of the 4 of them. And so I decided that, I was going to focus on just the 4 that had the activities, especially since one of them was chromatography. I thought that maybe that one video would fit for all three, and I could just highlight all three. But I'll tell you that these two videos or these two lessons are there's too much to them for me to hit them in a lesson all in one webinar. There'd be no way. So I will work on that, but it's probably going to be late summer before I get lessons out on leaf chromatography or walking rainbow. And I probably will redo the 6 of them over the course of time. But anyway, thank you for your feedback. Megan, in terms of test tube replacement, I just taped the paper strips to the inside of a cup and poured a tiny bit of water on it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The deal is whenever you're dealing with kids in class, by putting a lid on it, you've got controlled water movement. That would be my thoughts, just being able to control what's going on. But anyway, now I want to turn this over to Denise so that she can share a little bit about the Challenger Center. I think, Denise, you've got your mic hot, and I'll let you go ahead and share. So glad to have you here tonight, and I so appreciate all of your support throughout all of it.
Well, thank you so much for having me with you all tonight. It's great to see you all online. And also to know that so many of you are back in person. As Barbie noted earlier, that's great. So Challenger Center was honored and excited to be a part of this project. We have been the keeper of Christa's lessons since 1986, and when Ricky Arnold and Joe Acaba approached us and said that they wanted to do that as their project during the Year of Education on Station, we were really excited to work with them to do that. And the families were all very supportive of them doing the lessons in space and carrying on that legacy. So we were very excited to do that. We have been around for 35 years, since 1986. This is our 35th anniversary year. And we were formed by the families of the crew. So they wanted to make sure that the educational legacy of their loved ones carried on, and that they were remembered for their love of education and what they were trying to do, as opposed to being remembered for a tragedy. So Challenger Center reaches about 250,000 students annually. We have 40 centers across the U.S. in physical locations where students can go. And then we also have digital programs that can go anywhere that don't need a physical location. So in our physical locations, we do one of our core programs, which is Missions to Space. So students go into what we call the simulator, and some of the students are going to go into spacecraft, and some of them are going to go into mission control, and they're going to fly a mission to Mars, to the moon, to the ISS to look back down at the Earth, or to rendezvous with a comet. And they get to experience what it's like to work in a career and be on a team with other people. That's one of the core things that we do in all of our programs. Students are introduced to careers. They are put into situations where they have to practice 21st century skills like teamwork and communication and collaboration to work with each other. And so our center missions are where we started. That was our first core program. Those are primarily for middle school students in grades 5 through 8, and they are all space themed, as I talked about before. Our second core program that we have is called Classroom Adventures. We designed that for grades 3 through 5 at the moment. They're for upper elementary school students, and those actually focus on STEM topics a little bit more broadly. We have one on ocean science, one on weathering and erosion, and one on plant life cycles and ecosystems. And again, students get to play a role. They are a part of a team, and they have a job to do. We always have an emergency that happens in the middle of any of our programs where the kids have to come together and problem solve in real time to solve the emergency. And so Classroom Adventures is available as an in-person activity for students to do in their classrooms or in after-school settings. And then we have virtual missions. So virtual missions was actually born out of the pandemic. and something that we had been thinking about for a while, but out of necessity, as all of our schools did. Our Challenger Learning Centers also closed in the early stages of the pandemic. And so we developed virtual missions. So virtual missions are still led by one of our flight directors in one of our centers. They're targeted for grades 5 through 8. We have 2 virtual missions, one for grades 5 through 6 called Destination Mars, and one for grades 7 and 8 called Destination Moon. And so students can be fully virtual to do that with our flight director. They can also be in a hybrid situation if you have half your kids in and half your kids out. And then they can also be done in person, and we just turn off the camera feature if they're lucky enough to be together in school. So we take all of these programs and make sure that kids are really getting quality STEM content. We use all kinds of subject matter experts, things like that, and make those real career connections for kids. And virtual missions, actually in our Destination Mars mission, you'll see another astronaut educator. Dottie Metcalf-Lindenberger is the host of that Destination Mars mission. And so kids get to see her too. And I think Barbie is pulling up.
I've got two videos for you. I've got the, and we have time for the Discovery Challenger Center experience, and then we've also got the Destination Mars, I believe.
Perfect. Well, then I'm going to stop talking for just a moment and let her play those videos.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger was dedicated to a mission inspired by education. Though these heroes were tragically lost, their mission would not be forgotten. The families of the crew created Challenger Center for Space Science Education, a way to honor their loved ones while keeping the educational mission alive.
When the kids are here, they realize that science is not something that's scary, and it's not just from a textbook, and this just reinforces the hands-on science that we do in the classroom, and the kids leave very enthusiastic and just loving science.
Challenger Center launches students into space every day, inspiring and engaging them in science, technology, engineering, and math.
This is Space Fact. We conduct a spectrum analysis of unknown objects.
The Challenger Learning Center does indeed make learning fun. It makes me feel kind of proud about myself because I can go back to school and I can share what I learned and show it.
When the students walk through the door of any one of the global centers, they are transformed.
We are starting the landing simulation.
Astronauts, engineers, researchers, and journalists begin working together in mission control and the orbiting space station.
There could be someone in my classroom that could find a cure for cancer someday. I think it's real important for them to understand there are jobs out there that they are quite capable of doing, and some of them were real apprehensive to come in here with everything that they see around them, but to sit and be successful was absolutely fantastic to see.
No, back over.
While students share the thrill of discovery, the simulated environment brings classroom lessons to life and teaches important skills like teamwork and communication.
It would be fair to say learning is fun here because the instructors make it fun and you will have that feeling inside of you that tells you, okay, I've accomplished this, I'm glad that I listened, and you can tell yourself that I can do it.
We read you over.
It's all about innovation. To be able to spend a day being an astronaut or to work in mission control, my dream is that every child can come to the Challenger Learning Center at least once in their lives, and better still, many times.
As a leader in STEM education, Challenger Center's truly unique hands-on learning opportunities leave students with newfound excitement and passion to learn.
I do want to learn more about it. We went up in space and everyone communicated to each other.
Mission Controller, we are looking forward to working with you on today's mission.
Astronauts, are you ready to go?
Great successes start with something that happened in their youth and their childhood, and this is a fantastic experience for all of my students.
Every job involves teamwork somehow to get a job done.
It's this impact and experience that inspires students to pursue careers in these important fields and command their own destinies.
The Challenger Center experience is dynamic and unparalleled to anything else offered to students.
I think the Challenger Learning Center is phenomenal, exciting, amazing.
fantastic.
It was an out-of-this-world experience.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, end of test. Roger.
And I will say, as a teacher who experienced it, that it is absolutely amazing. I took my high school students, and I know it's targeted towards elementary and middle school, or 3 through 5, 6 through 8, but we still thoroughly enjoyed it. And they say that, the first astronaut to step on Mars is currently sitting in a middle school classroom. How cool would it be to have your students participate in Destination Mars, and then someday one of those students are actually one of the astronauts on Mars? Denise, do you want to say anything before I go into this, play this video?
Just that we actually have a lot of high school students that visit for missions. It's not just yours. We also have a lot of corporate groups or adults and teacher groups that come in and do team building with us as well. So I can attest to the fact that it's fun as an adult to fly one of these missions too, and you learn something every time. I did see a question in the chat about the virtual missions that we're going to get to see a video about in a moment. The minimum class size is 4 because you need 1 student for each team, and we recommend that you keep your class size under 30 for the virtual missions. And we can break out into multiple classes if you have more than that. And then I'll let Barbie go ahead and play the video about virtual missions.
Your primary goal today is to help us identify which moon offers the best possible location for our human habitat.
All right, so that was Destination Mars that you just saw. And as Barbie has up on the screen, and this will be in your deck later on, if you're interested in doing a virtual mission with your students, the link at challenger.org/virtual missions will take you to a sign-up page, and we'll connect you with a center and a flight director near you to run the missions for you. And that link is also in the chat. There is a small fee for running this with your students, as our Challenger Learning Centers are also, trying to keep up with the times right now, as they're closed to in-person most of the time. And all of that information is on the page if you want to sign up and get more information about the missions. Would this be available for summer camp experience? Absolutely. We have lots of centers who are actually incorporating this into virtual summer camps that they're running, and I'm sure they would be happy to do it in a summer camp experience that you are doing as well. All right. So we hope that you will stay connected with us at Challenger Center, and all of Christa's lessons are available on our website, as well as a lot of other resources that are free and available for you to use. We have a STEM at Home page that's up right now for activities that you can do with your students while you're not all in person. And then we've got some great hands-on activities for when you are back in person. So thank you all for letting me join you tonight. I appreciate it. And I hope that you all get some meaningful use out of Christa's Lost Lessons. It was really a wonderful project for us to work on. So I'll turn it back over to Barbie.
Denise, there is one more question about how long the missions take.
Oh, absolutely. So a center mission in person in one of our centers is about a 2-hour experience. If you are doing a classroom adventure in your classroom, there is a 1-hour simulation. There's an additional engineering activity and a writing activity that you can do. And then the virtual missions are 45 minutes to an hour, depending on what you need to fit into a class period.
That I am phenomenally grateful for the impact that Christa McCullough has made on many lives, because I count myself as one of those educators that was inspired by Christa. And so, Dolores, I'm glad to hear that you're doing those lost lessons, and I think it's quite a tribute to her and the impact that she made, not just 1985, 86 preparing to go, but that, 30 some years later, the impact is still being made. So I do want to say that even though this is towards the end of our webinar, that I have put additional slides in the PowerPoint that highlights each one of the astronauts that were on board. And so as they talked about that, the Challenger Centers or the families of not just Christa McCullough, or Christa McCullough's families, but all of the family members. They have also incorporated other astronauts that have lost their lives in the pursuit of space exploration, highlighting Apollo 1 and even STS-107 Space Shuttle Columbia. So it's really, really a cool tribute to them. And I think also the value that has been placed and is placed on education, because if we don't inspire students while they're in high school, elementary, and middle school, I mean, are they really going to study the appropriate content in college? Will they be prepared to make a difference in STEM careers? Not just to be astronauts, but we need engineers, and we need electricians, and we need welders, and there's coders, and just so many aspects of it. I dare say that there's not any profession that NASA doesn't use in some aspect of getting from here to the space station or even on to the moon and Mars. There's additional slides. This one here is highlighting how that Barbara Morgan, while she was Christa's backup, Barbara Morgan was selected as a mission specialist, a true astronaut, as part of the NASA Astronaut Group 17 in 1998. She's often been incorrectly referred to as an educator astronaut. However, when she served as a mission specialist on STS-118, she was a fully trained astronaut. She had the full astronaut corps 2-year training and had the same type of specialist as any other mission specialist that might have flown. The difference was that she was first a former classroom teacher. Since then, the Educator Astronaut Program was created in 1998. If you'll remember, the Teacher in Space program ended in 1990. The first call went out. That's awesome that Barbara Morgan actually serves on the Challenger Center's board. But a call went out by NASA in 2003, and they wanted educators to help lead the agency. Educators who were willing to leave their classrooms to truly become astronauts full-fledged. They would complete the same training and be flights aboard the space shuttle and possibly international space stations. The goal was they wanted those educators that can motivate students to study science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. They wanted educators who could inspire the next generation of explorers. As we know, only NASA can. As part of that, the astronaut class of 2004 actually had 3 educator astronauts. That was Ricky, Joe, and Dottie, which we heard from Dottie earlier in the video about the mission to Mars. And you can see the little inset in the upper right-hand corner, a focus on those 3. And of course, Joe and Ricky were the 2 that were on board the space station that helped film the lost lessons of Christa. So Dottie, also called Dorothy. So these are the 3 educator astronauts. And that doesn't mean that they're no longer educators. It's just that they're educators and astronauts, which is quite amazing. So the year of education on station, again, I know it's a little bit dated since that it was September of 2017 to February of 2018, but it's from that year of education on station that Teachers in Space that gave us those lost lessons of Christa McCullough. If you haven't signed up for NASA Express newsletter, in my opinion, is one of the best things you can do to stay informed about what's going on with NASA educationally. And I'm going to end with one of my favorite videos, which is called Why Do We Explore? And it's going to put us over time watching. And as soon as we finish this video, we'll transition to where you can download the materials.
We are the explorers. We have a need to find what is out there. It is a drive inside each and every one of us. The drive to wonder, to push the boundaries, and to explore. We expanded across our lands, settling new frontiers. We took to the oceans and learned that we could cross treacherous expanses in the pursuit of discovery. And then we took to the skies and flew. But that wasn't enough. We left the planet and redefined what was possible. We flew in space. We walked in space. What once was a melodramatic flight of fantasy became reality. Then, a new generation of spaceships captured hearts and minds for 3 decades and helped build a castle in the sky that is our lasting home in space. We have always looked up. For centuries, we wondered what was on the other side of the sky, and we have begun to answer that question. We have learned that all the exploration humankind has achieved is only a beginning. Right now, men and women are working on the next steps to go farther than we have ever gone before. New vessels will carry us, and new destinations await us. Everything we have ever accomplished leads to this moment in time, where exploration will now take us to the planets and the stars. Our nearest neighbors in the night sky have beckoned us, invited us, dared us to reach for them. We are the explorers. Throughout our history, we have taken both small steps and giant leaps in that pursuit. Our next destination awaits. We don't know what new discoveries lie ahead, but this is the very reason we must go.
Thank you so much for attending today.